On 4 June 1979, one Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings was sprung from his sweltering jail cell to lead a coup by other ranks of the Ghanaian army. This coup d'etat turned out to be a pacesetter event that reverberated throughout West Africa. This event, known as the June 4th Revolution in Ghana, was sparked when the then Supreme Military Council of General Fred Akuffo put Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings on public trial for attempting to overthrow the government on May 15, 1979. The revolution itself and Jerry Rawlings' failed mutiny was a culmination of the turbulent period between 1972 to 1979, which would definitely go down in history as being the most traumatic and most dramatic and the most tragic period in the history of Ghana. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the story of the events pertaining to Ghana's famous June 4 revolution of 1979. Since attaining independence in 1957, Ghana has seen several military coups d'etats. On February 24, 1966, the civilian administration that ruled Ghana under the leadership of President Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in a coup d'etat. Leaders of this 1966 military coup justified their takeover by saying that Kwame Nkrumah's administration was abusive and corrupt. They said that they were equally disturbed by Kwame Nkrumah's aggressive involvement in African politics and by his belief that Ghanaian troops could be sent everywhere in Africa to fight so-called liberation wars. Above all, they pointed to the absence of democratic practices in the nation, a situation which they claimed had affected the morale of the armed forces. After this coup against Kwame Nkrumah, Colonel Emmanuel Kotoka, Major Akwasi Afrifa, and the other coup leaders established the National Liberation Council to rule the nation until the beginning of the Second Republic in 1969. The elections that were held in 1969 brought the Oxford anthropologist Kofi Busia to power. However, in 1972, Kofi Busia was overthrown in a coup by General Ignatius Kuti Achieng-Pong. Achieng-Pong had been planning this coup 6 months into the Busia administration. Afterwards, General Achieng-Pong then charged the Busia administration with corruption, arbitrary dismissals, economic mismanagement, and the implementation of policies that were designed to lower the army's morale. Kofi Busia had cut military personnel and their allowance. This did not go down well with General Achieng-Pong, and that's why he went on to depose Busia. General Achieng-Pong, who was now in charge, was born in Kumasi, Ghana on September 23, 1931. He enrolled in the army in March of 1959 after officer cadet training in England. At the time of the coup against Kofi Busia, he was the commanding officer of the 5th Battalion of the Ghanaian Army. Once in charge, Achieng-Pong initially set up the National Redemption Council, which consisted largely of the people who had planned the original coup. But in 1975, he introduced the Supreme Military Council, which I'll call the SMC, and this council was made up of the commanders of the various military services. Ghana initially had good economic fortunes in the early days of this regime. Unfortunately, the country experienced dramatic economic decline 2 years on, and a period of unprecedented corruption ensued. Ghana's economy, already near bankruptcy under previous governments, collapsed completely. The revenues from cocoa were pocketed by the SMC and associated profiteers, and this money ended up in foreign bank accounts. It is said that the big men of the SMC wielded power to acquire wealth and dispense patronage, including those related to the rendering of sexual favors. Thus, the SMC and Achieng-Pong himself, who was rumored to have many mistresses, received the nickname Fawo to beg your golf, meaning bring your backside for your golf, a term inspired by the habit of government officials giving Volkswagen Golf cars to their mistresses. The profiteering, cheating and corruption that the country witnessed between 1974 and 1979 became known as kalabule. Kalabule essentially meant fraud, and it entailed trying to make excessive profits. Kalabule also meant using political clout to gain an unfair advantage in Ghanaian society. Besides kalabule, the country also experienced a period of high inflation. The inflation level, which was at 10% in 1972, rose to about 116% by 1977. The working class in Ghana were now being paid for their labor in money that was rapidly losing value. Inputs for farming, spare parts and raw materials for industry became as scarce as basic consumer items. Faced with such a grim economic situation, many Ghanaians, especially academics and professionals, emigrated to Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Europe, the United States, and other countries. The country of Ghana also began to experience unprecedented strikes and industrial unrest. The climax of the period of the Achiempong regime was reached between October 1976 and July of 1979. This period is commonly referred to in Ghana as the Union Government or the Unigov period. In October 1976, General Achiempong, who had until this point consistently maintained that his government was not prepared to transfer power to civilian politicians, suddenly presented a proposal to form a non-party government composed of the military, the police, and civilians. Achiempong described this form of government as a union government, Unigov. The Unigov proposal by Achiempong plunged Ghana into a political crisis. It was openly opposed by a small but vocal section of the Ghanaian public, mainly professionals, former Progressive Party activists, and university students. In March of 1978, Ignatius Achiempong's SMC organized a referendum to determine the constitutional status of this Unigov proposal. The results of the referendum indicated that a majority of the valid votes were cast in favor of the Unigov proposal. But the conduct of the government during the campaign leading to the referendum, as well as the government's handling of the referendum results, really aggravated the already tense political atmosphere in Ghana. Rumors even started circulating that workers in sensitive sectors of industry were about to launch a strike. To make matters worse for General Achiempong, his fellow members of the SMC, who were all senior commanding officers, accused him of running the country as a one-man show, thereby exonerating themselves and shifting the blame solely on him. It was against this background that Ignatius Achiempong was removed from office as head of state on 5 July 1978 by his SMC colleagues. On this day, Lieutenant General Fred Akuffo staged a palace coup and forced General Achiempong to resign and retire from the military. Lieutenant General Akuffo then took Ignatius Achiempong's place as chairman of the second iteration of the Supreme Military Council. Akuffo promised that elections would be held and that the country would return to civilian rule by 30 July 1979. Unfortunately, General Akuffo's government was doomed from the very beginning. This was because the military was totally discredited in the view of the people at this point. Even inside the army, amongst the lower-ranking members, including one Jerry Rawlings, there was a general consensus that all members of the SMC were guilty of corruption and mismanagement and should be brought to trial. Akuffo's conduct also didn't paint a pretty picture of him. Many probes and inquiries into state enterprises were initiated by Akuffo's government, but no prosecutions followed. Even the now deposed Ignatius Achiempong, who had been put under village arrest in his home village, was not brought to trial. He merely lost his army retirement benefits. The people in his village, on which he had benevolently bestowed favors during his regime, were happy to have him in their midst. His birthday was celebrated lavishly, and a businesswoman from Kumasi presented him with a Mercedes-Benz as a gift. All of this showed to the common man that the SMC was not serious about reforms. It appeared that the SMC members would be guaranteed immunity to any legal proceedings connected to their dealings and finances. So all of these events led Jerry Rawlings to conduct a mutiny on 15 May 1979. Elections were scheduled to be held on the 18th of June 1979, but on May 15, 1979, there was an attempted mutiny led by Flight Lieutenant Jerry J. Rawlings. Jerry Rawlings was born in June of 1947 to a Scottish father who had been a chemist in Accra, Ghana's capital, and an airway mother. Rawlings attended the prestigious Achimota Secondary School, leaving in 1966 to join the Air Force the following year. Following his initial cadet training, he was posted to the No. 1 Communication Squadron. At the time of the military mutiny that he led on the 15th of May 1979, he had achieved the rank of Flight Lieutenant and was attached to the No. 4 Jet Squadron in Accra. There, he had begun to identify with a group within the armed forces who considered that there was an urgent need for radical political change in Ghana. And as I already alluded to, even though the regime of General Fred Akuffo and the second iteration of the SMC had promised to hold multi-party elections, public dissatisfaction had reached a point where there were demands not just for civilian government, but for the punishment of Achieng and his colleagues for their corruption and mismanagement. This is what led Jerry Rawlings to lead a small-scale armed forces mutiny on the 15th of May 1979. However, the attempt by Rawlings failed on the same day, and he and his associates were then arrested. Subsequently, Jerry Rawlings and his men appeared before a court-martial where he explained that his intentions were not to take power in order to stay in power, but to undertake a house cleaning of the armed forces whose higher ranks had exploited the civilians and the junior ranks in the army for too long. Rawlings also expressed concern about the extent of foreign domination of Ghana's economy. Newspaper reports of the proceedings from this trial gained Jerry Rawlings widespread popularity in Ghana. This situation in Ghana reached a new level in early June of 1979. The court proceedings for Jerry Rawlings' trial were due to reconvene on the 4th of June, but on the night of June 3, 1979, a group of junior officers, including one Major Boake Jan and enlisted personnel of the 5th Battalion and the reconnaissance regime in Camp Burma, staged a bloody coup and freed Jerry Rawlings. Jerry Rawlings did not know of the plan ahead of time. He later recalled that when the soldiers broke open his cell, he was uncertain if it was a government trick to kill him as he escaped. While he neither planned nor even fought in the insurrection that ensued, he was perfectly cast to play the hero who would unite a fractured public. Remember his mutiny on 15 May and the trial had brought him newfound fame in Ghana. So Jerry Rawlings' future changed at 6 a.m. on June 4, 1979, when he gave an improvised speech live on the radio. He was breathless after having run 500 meters to Ghana Broadcasting House. In those days, radio was the main medium for communication. Instead of the early morning news, Jerry Rawlings' voice entered the houses, markets and offices of the nation declaring, "The ranks have just gotten me out of my jail cell. They have taken over the destiny of the nation." He said that the rampaging soldiers were angry, full of malice that we've put into them, and that a moral reckoning was coming for Ghana. Shortly afterwards, Jerry Rawlings established and became the chairman of a 15-member Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, the AFRC, primarily composed of junior army officers. The following is an excerpt from a broadcast he made where he was announcing the formation of the AFRC, and I quote, "We, the junior officers and other ranks, wish to assure the nation that we are firmly in control of the situation, and in the meantime, an Armed Forces Revolutionary Council comprising junior officers and other ranks has been set up. We have felt that the SMC would do a house cleaning exercise and put the reputation of the armed forces on an even keel before handing over power. All the attempts of the SMC to do this have failed. In these circumstances, we have no alternative but to take over the administration of the country. In the period at our disposal, we have plans for a house cleaning exercise and we are going to act on it immediately. We wish to reassure the nation that we do not intend to cling to power. The Armed Forces Revolutionary Council will ensure a smooth transition to constitutional rule as planned. Long live the revolution, long live Ghana." In these broadcasts, which were meant to bring discipline to a tense situation, Rawlings said that soldiers would think that this revolution is about driving around in fancy cars are making a serious mistake. Anyone trying to abuse the situation will face the consequences before the firing squad. It was announced that the AFRC were seeking total justice and would use revolutionary methods to pursue it. The months that followed were probably the most dynamic and tense in Ghana's history as a nation. The armed forces were turned upside down as senior officers were imprisoned by their men and shaved bald. Throughout the country, people's courts were set up to mete out revolutionary justice. 8 people, including 3 former heads of states, Kwasi Afrifa, Ignatius Achieng and Fred Akuffo, as well as those members of the SMC who were widely known to be the most guilty of corruption, were executed. In the case of Ignatius Achieng, before his execution, he was treated to a last dinner of fufu brought to him by his then 25-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. It is said that his last words to her were, "Tell everybody I was a good man and pray for me." The very next morning, Ignatius Achiempong and Edward Utuka, the Major General who had served as the commander of the border guards, were driven to an Anglican church situated in Camp Burma, the seat of power for successive Ghanaian military governments. At the church, both men prayed for a short period before being taken to the firing range in Teshi that was to serve as the place of execution. This act sent a shockwave throughout the nation of Ghana. Ministers, regional commissioners, top civil servants and managers of state enterprises were told to declare their assets, and if these were found to be acquired illegally, confiscation and prison sentences followed. The soldiers went into the streets and the markets to see to it that goods were being sold for controlled prices that had been gazetted by the government. During this whole time, Ghana was officially under a regime of prices fixed and controlled by the government. But with shortages and inflation, this system had broken down. As the army was moving about and visiting these various marketplaces, excited queues of people formed at the shops as they watched the traders who had hoarded and overpriced their goods being beaten up by the soldiers and sent into the streets with a sign around their neck saying, "I am a chief of Kalabule." The international community reacted to the Ghanaian revolution and they started putting some pressure on Rawlings and his AFRC to take it easy. The nations of Togo and Benin sent diplomatic missions to try and save the life of Fred Akuffo. Nigeria and Britain even protested against the executions. Nigeria, the supplier of most of Ghana's oil, reduced Ghana's 90-day credit to 30 and then broke off oil supplies altogether. The ensuing petrol rationing led to serious transportation problems, which were eventually alleviated when a new agreement on oil supplies was made with the nations of Algeria and Libya. Suppliers' credit was suspended and foreign aid money was withheld. Inside the country, these international reactions were widely felt to be hypocritical. Divisions inside the AFRC also emerged, but these divisions never really manifested themselves. As promised by Jerry Rawlings and the AFRC, the elections went on as scheduled. The election proved to be a contest between two main parties, the People's National Party, the PNP, and the Popular Front Party, the PFP. The PNP under Dr. Hila Liman won 71 seats, and the PFP under Victor Owusu won only 42 seats. And so on 24 September 1979, after 3 months in charge, the AFRC and Jerry J. Rawlings handed over power to the newly elected Third Republic with a warning to the new president, Dr. Hila Liman, that the soldiers would be watching. Jerry Rawlings remained the most popular man in Ghana and with the help of a new batch of radicals, plotted a return to power. The Third Republic of Dr. Hila Liman would be overthrown in 28 months' time on December 31, 1981, once again by Jerry Rawlings. This is a story for another day. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.